Good afternoon. This is David Zilberman, and I will present a presentation about supply chain as well, and how we can apply our work in supply chain in terms of data collection and empirical analysis. Okay. So I'll start with motivation, introduce some theory, some of the implications, the data need, and the conclusion. Now, the starting point of my analysis is economic theory that was formed in the 19th centuries when agricultural was a dominant industry, perfect competition ruled, and the models of Adam Smith reflect reality, but things have changed. And the agricultural economists like Theodore Schultz realized it. We have high rate of innovation. We have new supply chains. We have monopolistic power. So we really live in a world where the basic assumptions of economic theory doesn't work. And to some extent, as an economist, one of our challenges is to develop a new theory and understanding. In particular, one of the key elements of the new reality is the prominence of supply chain. Supply chain are very important in agriculture. They dominate a lot of the industries, from wheat to fruit and vegetables and livestock. And if you want to see what how agriculture works, you need to understand the supply chain, as we saw in the recent pandemic. Now, we really distinguish in our analysis between 2 points: the innovation supply chain, the systems that develop new innovation, and the product supply chain, which is a system that takes the innovation and implements it. And the product supply chain is especially important in order to understand how new innovation operates in agriculture. When we look at the system supply, at the product supply chain, we realize that generally we have several stages in this system. We have innovators that come with new technology. You have farmers that produce it. A lot of times the innovator is a processor, and then you work with retailers to sell the product. And this type of supply chain may rely on vertical integration, may have contracting, and in many cases rely on markets. Now, to understand a little bit more about the innovation supply chain, I have to introduce the notion of educational industrial complex. There are 2 ways through which innovation enters our world. On one hand, university researchers come with an idea, they take the idea, they make sure that it's valid, and this idea may provide a foundation to a product. It can be a food, it can be a machinery, it can be a type of service, and generally what happens is that the scientists work with a startup and maybe with a big company to develop a product. Another way that we have supply chain is that someone comes with an idea, and then we have a product design company that take this idea and move it forward. That's the way that Edison was working. That's the way that Ford was working. They basically use existing knowledge to develop a new product. Now, what I'm really interested in is the design of the product supply chain, and how you think about designing a supply chain for product. The first thing that you do, you assess future demand. You try to have the best prediction of future demand, because if there is no demand, there is no supply. So I think this is a very important stage in any supply chain, and I've done it myself for companies to try to see over time what will be the adoption process, what will be the income, who will buy it, where will they buy it. It's very, very important to have a good ability to predict what will happen to a new product. Then you really have to design the supply chain. And you generally develop a plan that maximizes net expected present value. You have to show it to banker. So you have to show net present value. And in order to do, and what you do in this optimization, you determine the quantities of different intermediate products. You determine how much you produce internally and how much you buy from others. Decide if you have contracts and contract to vertical integration or rely on market. And then there are a lot of constraints. Some of the constraints are physical constraints. You don't have enough land, you don't have expertise, but credit is very, very important because early stages, supply chain may be financed by venture capital, hedge fund. Later on, they may be financed by stock and bonds. And financial arrangement change throughout the life of the supply chain. And the ability to get finance is crucial in designing supply chain. And policy affects supply chain. That's the reason that finance and policy are so important. So here I think about a simple supply chain. It has 3 stages. You have feedstock, you produce, let's say, grain. It can be produced in-house, or you can produce it, or you can buy it from others. And by farmers. Then you process it, and then you can decide how much you sell it to restaurants and how much you sell it to retailers. Wine. A winery may have their own grapes, they buy grapes from others. They produce the wine, they have different type of wine. Some go to restaurant, some goes to supermarket, and then it goes to the consumer. Another example, flowers in Kenya. People start growing flowers in Kenya. They basically, at the beginning, they were vertically integrated, produce the flower and process them. But after a while, they start buying from flowers. Again, people that produce flowers sell some of it to retailers, to Safeway, and some of it they sell to florists. Now, so the basic calculation to determine the size and structure of supply chain is maximize net present value of revenues from all the sources, minus marketing costs, minus processing costs, which depend on capital and labor, minus the cost of production in-house, minus the cost of expenditure buying from others, minus investment in processing. So altogether, you take it all into account and you discount it. You take into account that you build new capital that basically is based on all capital plus invested minus depreciation, and you get some sort of rules. One basic rule is a marginal benefit from any final product is equal to marginal cost from all the activities that produce it. So throughout the supply chain, if you have multiple activities, the ratio between the marginal benefit and marginal cost is the same. The other thing is that the marginal benefit of investment at each period is equal to the net present value of the marginal cost of capital over time. So the optimization is constrained by availability and cost of capital. And again, it's influenced by policy. Now, generally, if you have an innovation that is started by an entrepreneur, the entrepreneur has a lot of power to determine the market structure. And generally, entrepreneurs will really start with some sort of monopolistic structure. Now, if there are many similar products, you have monopolistic competition. So all the wineries are in monopolistic competition. If you have a unique product like Apple Computer, you have a middleman, monopolistic in the output side, monopolistic in the input side. But the innovator always starts a product. So a company like Apple or a company that produces a unique product can charge a lot and have a big margin. A company that produces non-unique product cannot charge a lot and their margin will be very small. But generally speaking, whoever starts a company expects some sort of margin. Now, the supply chain may start at a given location. For example, Walmart started at Arkansas, and then it will move from one place to another. So this element of expansion is very, very important. Generally speaking, it may move overseas like McDonald's did. And in order to do it, you need to have partners. Sometimes you will try to expand overseas and engage in foreign direct investment. And others, local partner will invite you. So to some extent, you have this expansion and you change the product to local conditions. So that's what really happened for many agricultural supply chain. Even with food supply chain, you see that you change your product to affect what people like. So the bananas that are consumed in the US and Europe or Russia are different to slightly because of differences in preferences of consumers. Now, one of the key elements of modern supply chain is adaptation to shocks. All the time when you have a new product, you innovate all the time. For example, the lettuce industry was stagnated since they invented pre-cut lettuce. And when they invented pre-cut lettuce, in the beginning, they sold it to restaurants. Later on, they start selling it to consumer, and they start selling pre-cut salads. Pivoting basically is a redesign of supply chain with respect to stock. So during the pandemic, what happened? A lot of supermarkets suddenly start introducing systems that can bring you your product at home. Google, for example, Uber developed Uber Foods. So supply chain adapt all the time to shocks, and that's something that is really important when we develop a model and analysis of supply chain. Now, all this idea of pivoting is consistent with Pendeck and Dixit analysis that shock led to adaptation. If the reward is big, people will switch. Now, what are the data need? We need a lot of data if you want to analyze supply chain. I don't really think that we can have good understanding of agriculture without having good data. And we really need to know about the structure of the supply chain, who are the participants, who own it, the nature of the ownership, the financial arrangement. That's very, very difficult. You need to know when we have under what condition you have vertical integration, contracting, cooperative, reliance on market. That is one thing. We need data on the structure of supply chain. We need to have data on transaction. Who is buying, who is selling, what quantity, what type of product, what's the price. Data on transaction is very, very important. We need to have data on labor and variable input. It's very important to understand what are the costs of supply chain beyond the farm gate, because a lot of time farmers complain they get low prices. The question, are they low? No. Okay. Another thing is technology adoption. What type of technologies they adopt, when and how. And then we need a lot of time to learn about the narrative. We need to know the story because we're opposite before you obtain numbers. We need to distinguish between a census that you know what are the big supply chain and the ongoing activity. So it's a huge challenge that the USDA is finding. So what are my conclusions? The educational industrial complex is a key driver of innovation. Agriculture become more privatized. We need to develop that we have a system of innovation produced by the public and private sector. That generally speaking, innovation result in establishment of new supply chain, and this new supply chain result in non-competitive behavior that evolves over time. And the magnitude of supply chain depends on our ability to deal with credit and risk. And when you have new product, when you have some sort of monopoly, you don't have perfect competition. So another implication that research need to go beyond the farm gate. You need to study value chain, explain their design, the role of uncertainty, the linkage between research and product quality, the adaptation to new technologies, for example, robots, IT, biotech, and how climate change will affect supply chain. Assess the impact of supply chain on various groups of the economy. Impact of policy on innovation and performance of supply chain. For example, trade policy, IPR, regulation, credit, investment in data is very important. And I think that at the end, we will move from ag policy to agri-food policy, from ag policy to agri-food policy. I hope that you enjoyed. I wish I could be with you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to make this presentation. And it was really a pleasure to be here. Thanks. Bye.